This event is very much looking at the history of community-based housing associations. Started back 50 years ago, obviously it's a 50-year celebration, and it has developed now into a very strong community-based housing association where housing associations not only supply homes for people, but they supply community investment, community wealth, and that's really important to the people that live in our areas and our homes.
There were tenements that needed to be regenerated, or at least given a short life. And so we tried a wee experiment that said, could we actually get people involved in improving their own houses? And the answer was yes.
You mark an occasion because it has been successful, it has survived, it has lasted. 50 years is a long time of celebration, and it's really important that we recognise the people that have been involved and the actions that have taken place.
Housing wasn't just about housing and four bare walls in a place. Housing was about your home, it was your home, but you had to have that strong community. You had to have more than that. You had to have people who cared about what was going on in the area. People that if they were in trouble, they could find somebody within the area to go and get help.
I'm definitely proud of what we've achieved. As local people, you know, we didn't have all degrees or anything else. I'd never worked with architects or contractors or anything, and the things we learned, how to read designs and everything else, and our input, if we didn't like it, we told them that we wanted it changed, and that's what it was all about.
And it's a fantastic legacy to leave behind, and it wasn't just for our generation, it was for all the generations that are coming ahead of us.
But the big moment, I think, for a lot of us came with Cathy Come Home. Who here remembers Cathy Come Home? Ah, good number. Because Cathy Come Home, of course, was the film in 1966 about this homeless couple and their family, and it sparked off a great debate. It was one of the great television documentaries of our time. It created shelter. And out of shelter grew a number of housing associations, mainly called something Christian Action Housing Association. There was Christian Action Glasgow Housing Association, Christian Action Greenock Housing Association, Christian Action Edinburgh Housing Association. And all these housing associations, like many other housing associations before them, were about providing housing for homeless people. But that wasn't how the community-based housing associations actually started. So why do we have community-based housing associations when there have been housing associations for years? Well, this is the reason. I took this photograph of wee Jimmy in 1970. It makes me really feel old to realise he's nearly 60, if he's still with us. And it was because of him and his pals and the kind of housing environment that they lived in, not just the houses, but the environment itself, that actually said that something needs to be done. Now, something was being done. And this was Glasgow Corporation's vision for the city. This is how they were going to solve the problems of tenements. Because for many, particularly in the Labour Party, tenements equaled bad landlords, equaled slums. Slums had to be got rid of and had to be replaced, in this case, with high-rise flats. Some of you may remember the wonderful Basil Spence. We had the best architects of the days doing them as well. Basil Spence flats, and I love this picture because if you look on the right, there's the Queen looking at this. It's almost as if the city architect was pointing at it as saying, no, if we could only get the people to that size as well, we could do very well. But it's the lady with the hat realizing how similar her hat is to the Queen's. What an embarrassment. Anyhow, This was to be Gorbals. Fraser, this was before your time, I know. Or you were to go to Cumbernauld, new towns, and all the rest of it. This is how we were going to solve the problem. But then along comes, I used to actually say, there's a moment in time when God gets involved in Glasgow. And that was on the night of the 14th, 15th January 1968. I actually was in Canada at the time as a student working over there, and I heard the Lord Provost saying they've had a terrible storm in Glasgow. It's blown all the roofs off all the houses. And that actually was the moment when I think a major change took place in attitudes. We realized in the city just how big the problem was of the tenements and how impossible it would be to replace them all so quickly. But in looking at this tenement stuff, we decided there were 5 key issues. One was the issue of getting people to buy into it. It was a good idea if people want it. Secondly, if we could get people in, what about the technical issues? How do you fit bathrooms into tenements? Thirdly was what kind of process, because it's a very complicated system, having to get improvement grants and all the rest of it. Then there were the whole question of, well, what do we do about people that don't want or can't afford to improve? So that's where we started. And studies were done, reports were produced, meetings took place in my flat, and models were shown about how you could put a bathroom in, and even drawings. So this is a John Gilbert drawing showing how to put a bathroom into a tenement. And then people started to say, right, we've heard you, this sounds a good idea, let's do something about it. John Gibbons came home one Thursday night with a pink slip in his wage packet, and UCS workout was taking place. So we all marched along, joined the march, but then got ourselves organised. So that when the UCS working was over, we were able to move, and we got Annie's loo finished. Became a show house, full nonsense, and completely pinched off the private sector. Show house, come and see it. 700 people went through it, our house, in 10 days, including very senior people from the Scottish Government, or the government as it was. I keep on calling it the Scottish Government. It wasn't the Scottish Government. It was the Scottish Office. And this is how you get for your money, because we made it as if you were buying a television set. And we could tell you could buy extras, and here is how you can pay for it. You get a grant, and we had a streamlined system for that. And this is what you get. This was Annie's loo. And then Mrs. Gibbons says, Annie Gibbons says, it's the best 190 quid's worth I've ever had. If that wasn't marketing in 1972, I don't know. Anyhow, after Annie's loo, what the corporation said was, right, you've proved you can put a bathroom into 3 houses. 1, 2, now, next, if you can sign everybody else up for it, then we'll create alternative housing treatment area for improvement, and you can organise it. So we did that. Within 6 months, we get everybody signed up. We then had to find what we do about people who did not want to improve or couldn't improve. And we said we'd create a housing association. We also found a way of helping people who said, well, we really don't want a house here. And if we move out the centre house or even the side house and up our close, you could put that house into the next door house and make a bigger house. So, okay. So we got a rehousing arrangement with the council, and people who wanted to go were allowed to go. It was about choice. And of course, the Architecture Centre organisation called Assist was created to run this treatment area. There were all sorts of things came out of this office. But probably the most important was central government. Now, I have to say, we couldn't find It was originally called Central Govan Housing Association. It wasn't called Govan Housing Association, but since it moved out of just the centre, it had to change its name. And the chap on the right, and this will come strange in a conversation about community-based housing associations. The chap on the right is Jim Stephen, who ran Stevens Shipyard. But he was an interesting character, and he became the first chairman of Central Govan Housing Association. I became the secretary, and we decided what kind of housing association we wanted. So we were going to create a different housing association, one that was local, that was about a local area. Two, had to be community-based. What did that mean? Well, it meant that membership was open to everybody who lived in the area. Now remember, we're talking about an area which had owner-occupiers, had shopkeepers, as well as potential tenants, all of whom had an interest in the community and in the tenements being improved. So I got a lawyer friend of mine to change the wording of the document that we registered as a friendly society with, to ensure that membership was open to everyone and that therefore the board would be elected by the membership. Up till now, most housing associations, you became a member of the board or the committee, the management committee, because you knew somebody or somebody invited you in. It wasn't a democratic institution. And so we created a more democratic institution. And one of the things we said at the time that was important was the short line between the tenant and the chairman of the board. You know, if you think about it, in the council, if you were a tenant and the chairman of the housing committee was there, you had to do many levels before you could get to them. We said, no, we need to make it as close. And actually, even better, the chair should be somebody living in the area, understanding the area. And that's why it became a community-based housing association. And we also said it should have a local office, a local place where it would be. So we did that, and can you all read this? Life's a drudge with an outside kludge, but an inside loo is a joy for you. That was the slogan. And we did marketing and all sorts of things. And here are ladies, the kind of committee members. One of the interesting things about how community housing associations, community-based housing associations, is how lady-driven they are. And it's very interesting. We found it very difficult, even in the early days, to get a lot of men involved. And that was very much a matriarchal society we were working with. We actually did things like got the backcourt. Yeah, that's the beginnings of it. That was the first backcourt to be done in Govan. Maybe not to the standard we now expect, but there was, at least all the bins were under cover. And so on the basis of that, the Housing Corporation and Glasgow City Council formed a partnership. That partnership was to take the ideas that we had developed in Govan and to make it citywide. But there were some changes. First of all, instead of assist, as it had been doing the coordination, it would be done by housing associations, community-based housing associations. Secondly, it would have a 30-year life, not the short life improvement that we had started to do in Govan. And interestingly enough, of course, eventually the 15-year life improvement we did in Taransay Street had to be done all over again to the 30-year life. And that was important. The third thing was it was going to have to be done by traditional contract. We had done a very interesting, as I said, it was like buying a television, what we were doing in Govan. But it was going to be the long traditional contract. And to help in that, because the costs were going to be outweigh the ability of many of the owner-occupiers, who are really owner-occupiers in name only, because they'd bought it in a deposit scheme, almost hire purchase scheme. It was beyond their economic. So there was, Jim Hastie arrived at this point in time into the Housing Corporation and set up an acquisition program, which really enabled it to roll ahead. And we were able to plan with the council where the areas the council wanted to go. We would then move in, get a committee going. I always remember standing early days in Tollcross on the platform at Tollcross and saying, right, folks, if you want your house improved, your landlord's not going to do it for you. The council hasn't the resources to do it for you. The only people that are going to do it for you is yourselves. And we in the Housing Corporation, because of the way we've been set up, will help. And that was the way we got many of these areas going. So, of course, there was decanting. And by this time, the magic word HAG had arrived. Then there's political commitment at national and local level, and given financial support. I think at those days, local, small-scale delivery was very much valued. There was a kind of feeling that small is beautiful was actually worth trying and demonstrating that it could work. And above all, I think the volunteers were valued, learnt, and found that by going through this process, by running housing associations, they do all sorts of other things. And that is really a very important thing. And somewhere in all of this, there were risks. When Jim and I joined the Housing Corporation, we were in our early 20s, and we were given a lot of freedom from masters in London, not in Edinburgh, in London. As did the council take a lot of risks in saying, right, we'll go with this, let's see it. The question I have is, how far are these values, these approaches still available today? How much have we constrained everything to the point where the values that we were working on and which then created the movement which we now see here today are still available for the future? And local heroes.
I think secondly, CBHAs are a brilliant example of localism in action, and you'll struggle to find a better one in the UK context, I think. Local people set up these new organisations, they brought local knowledge, they brought a kind of tenacity to deliver real change. And that wasn't an easy task. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of learning new skills, and they were also very visible in their communities. But at that time, they also enjoyed a very generous funding regime and also a lot of support and a really nurturing relationship from the Housing Corporation. And this was really important to helping get these new organisations off the ground. Now, if we look back at the 70s and 80s, it was a very different time and gender roles were a lot more traditional. And it's probably no surprise then that people often talk to me about gendered barriers that they face, especially around childcare, but also sometimes dismissive attitudes. But more positively, I think, women also told me about how their organisations, their CBHAs, really supported them to overcome these challenges so that they could juggle their different roles and succeed in their volunteering as board members. But I think one of the things I would stress as one of the take-home messages is that in a time of crisis, we really need public investment in social housing. CBHAs have delivered so much in the last 50 years, and with targeted support, they could do even more. But I think beyond the kind of recommendations that are in the report, I think the research is also a real testament to people power and the value of communities doing things for themselves. And I'm really glad we've been able to all come together today to kind of recognise and celebrate that, because it is quite special.
One winter it was so cold, the icicles were forming on the metal frames in the windows, and my family had to bring all the mattresses down to the living room and keep the coal fire going all night. When I was learning all about housing, I found out that for every pound I paid in rent, 70 pence of that went to pay the loan that the old Glasgow Corporation had borrowed to build the Purfler Estates. No wonder there was no money, and there was no money for investment. We went through different ideas. First of all, tenant management. That was a no-go area because the council were still in control. We didn't want that. Then it was a par value idea. We scrubbed that. And then the Housing Corporation came along and said, if you sign for the Registrar of Friendly Societies, we'll give you the money to do your houses up. Now that was 1.5 million, because I was secretary at the time, and I remember that figure. I couldn't even have taken a Provi loan out to do that. But it was fantastic, and we had only 5% to pay back. So we were in the money. Jim Hasey and Alistair Dixon were the two people we worked with. The architect we worked with was Mike Thornley, and we also worked with Beth Riley, who was Mike's development officer. We would register with Friendly Society. They would give us the money. From then it was all go. And our official opening, there was over 350 people, not all from Castlehill, turned up to see what we had done. We had over 1,200 units, refurbished and new build, and we factored 147. We worked from a beautiful 18th century stable block, which I was involved in the restoration, and it's one of our subsidiaries. We have our own pre-5 nursery. We have our own care home for elderly men with alcohol problems. And I think our relationship with Glasgow City Council has improved. And I'll never forget a friend of mine. I was involved in a tenants association in Tormouth. She was a secretary, quite a loud mouth, and what she said, Anna, they're after heed if they give you the money to run things yourself. So we proved actually different. And we'll never forget we're grassroots. And one of the things I've always insisted, there is no such word as no. If you want something done, they tell you no. There's another way you can do it.
I'd just had my first baby, and after that, I was busy working away in the community, like helping set up mother and toddler groups and all that kind of stuff, and trying to get the community together. And John came to me and he says, Irene, would you do us a favour? Would you start talking to people and try to say, I've just heard as a student that stays in Belfield Street, and he's heard about this community-based housing association movement. I don't know where it is, but it's seemingly it's down in England. We're going to check it out. He says, when we check it out, he checked it out, came back to me and says, look, this is the details. Could you go and talk to people? We need you to get them to sell their houses to the association. We need you to get them to join us, give up their time, become volunteers. They're not going to get paid, but they're going to reap the benefits of what happens in the area. So there was a traipsing up and downstairs with the baby in arms and whatever, trying to convince people. We actually sold our own flat back to the Housing Association because I really believed, when I read all the information we had, I believed in this. This was something that had never been tried before. And what got me more than anything else, the jobs that I'd had before was in the community. And I thought, there is nothing stronger than people power. Then there's nothing stronger than communities getting together and fighting for what they believe in.
And I would start with the three Govanhill ladies. They were remarkable women. It's been something that's been mentioned, but Govanhill was, as far as I'm concerned, the first registered community-based housing association. And it was run by, a lot of people here will remember them, because they were there for, like the previous two speakers, they were there for a long time. Joan Grant, Anne Scott, and the wee chair, Betty Stevenson. And that really was a big laugh from the Govanhill ladies, because he then came back in the back court. Everyone was relaxed. He was speaking to the women who were now out in the back court. And he taught what I think, it's not just the tenacity of the local people running community-based housing associations. It's a great phrase from McDermott, to be yourself and make that worth being. Not just to be yourself and be, to be yourself and make that worth being. And that's what a lot of the leaders, these females, did for community-based housing associations, the pioneers in the early days. These were things that happened. What you needed in the community-based associations, beyond the local areas, Govanhill, Maryhill, and the growth of the 20 community-based housing associations in the city, was they needed a support network. And John Butterley, Eddie McEachran of Elder Park, Ned Donaldson of Springburn and Postle Park, they were astonishing leaders in the campaigning work that went on. The other big support network, because running a community-based association, it isn't all, despite Irene and real belief it was all pleasure. It wasn't. The tricky issues of staff salaries, employment, as staff grew, these were real difficult issues, and they go on being real big issues. But the work that was done by Councillor Helen McGregor, by John Ferguson of Parkhead, and I'll never forget one of the first chairpersons Andrew Robertson had in the Glasgow, in the EVH, the Clydeside Federation that became EVH, the one and only Dame Flora Glenn definitely gets a mention. The second wave of the formation of CBHAs, Anna's dealt with brilliantly, but Frances McCall of Calvi, the work that she did with the 6 pilots, and also Marion Wright and David Mackenzie from Postle, Hawthorne, they were phenomenal.
So things aren't what they were, but communities are still made of real people and physical buildings in a real environment, and their needs, especially in our poorer communities, remain just the same and just as acute. The community housing association movement, as you saw, it's revolutionary, and its underlying principle is that local folk can literally shape and regenerate their own communities, and that's still a powerful force for good, and it still is relevant and needed, and a word I would use is as vital as ever. It's never been just about housing, it's about local folk coming together to regenerate where they belong, and that's provided the foundation for everything that we do. What we do now, what we've been doing for the last 50 years, and what folk like me are going to struggle to try to continue to do into the future. What I've got that you don't have, Raymond, is a better picture, because I've got a car that's got hag on it, as you'll see over there. You know, and that was the storm that saved the city, and the man that helped save the city, along with another great man that I'll mention, that has been mentioned, Jim Johnson, that helped kick it all off, although there were some things before. Again, that's been there. It's become a bit of a eulogy to John Butterley, but I use that image to personify, exemplify to all of the folk there from across Europe about what community control was. It's about people from the community, John, telling architects what to do. Yes, working with them, but in control and being the client, not being told by consultants or local authorities or anybody else what to do. And one of the men that led the anti-dampness campaign was Bill Sharkey, who became one of our chairs, you know, and it's quite funny, that airspace it was in the last house that he was in, he'd been born on Shamrock Street way back in the 30s, and that was very, very close to there. It was within 100 metres. He'd moved into the Dampies, which was again on that street, and he'd led the campaign to haul them down. So that's what he was doing, whilst John and Eileen and others across Glasgow were rebuilding it. So what the Gorbals got was, it was thriving in the 30s, decimated in the 1950s and 60s, patronised in the late 1960s, and then come the late 1980s and the early 90s, decimated again. It's a really sad story of a waste of lives and a waste of resources. I think we're the biggest community ownership grouping in Europe, but the academics here could go and look at the definitions and check that out. As a movement, we consistently and comprehensively outperform our national and regional competitors. David does a brilliant annual publication that proves that from the regulator statistics. But at the centre of a myriad of wider action and community regeneration initiatives, from local employment schemes to food pantries, and we're filling all the voids left by public sector cuts. We're picking up the bulk. We're doing all the welfare benefits advice. I notice George Gillespie is gone, but I'm pretty sure he'd like us to take over the parks and roads, maybe even the schools. But sorry, we're not going to do that. But we are going that extra mile because we actually care. We care more than any other authority because it's inbuilt, it's in our DNA. I actually think we saved this city. The tenements, the outer estates, the way we've handled stock transfers, our new build infills and environmental improvements since. Duke Street wouldn't exist. You don't get the kind of regeneration that Milbank and Reedvale have done in Duke Street over almost a generation, 2 generations. No other kind of organisation would have the patience to deliver that. Cathcart's very similar, like in Govanhill. I mean, we wouldn't have that Cathcart Road going into the city. And Garscoop and Maryhill Road, you know, they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Queen's Cross and Maryhill Housing Associations. And the good stuff that the council did back in the early 80s, that was just copying what Simister Monaghan, who were working for Govanhill at the time, had done. So even where we didn't do the work, we influenced it. And both of those associations, both Queen's Cross and Maryhill, are still at the cutting edge of big physical regeneration programmes. Our peripheral estates have been collectively transformed by Anna's organisation and Maureen's organisation. I'm down as the last contributor, but this shouldn't be wrapped up by another old staff member guy with a limited shelf life. There are huge challenges ahead, and we need to make sure that we get to play our full part, and that energy and ability is harnessed to improve things further and take on the ongoing challenges of our tenements and outer estates, just as Anna Stewart, Eileen McInnes, Maureen Cope have done and are still doing. I'm just the middleman, literally, and I'm not being gender neutral because we don't need a middleman. That's what I am. We need the wide women, or the wise women, is more better put. So I'd like to hand over now to a voluntary committee member, a woman and someone who will be around for a long time to come, to take her organisation and our movement into a bright future. So please welcome Denise Dempsey, the new chair of Reedvale Housing Association, to say the final words.
I never imagined I'd be chair of a housing association, but I'm learning quickly and finding it incredibly rewarding to serve my community in this way. It's ironic, but when things are going well for an association, attracting new committee members can be more of a challenge. But all of us need to continue to work hard to attract good committee members, including younger people. And I'm told I count today. I'm not going to argue with that, but my body tells me a different story in the morning. If we can recruit well, run ourselves well and carry on providing great services, community-based housing associations should prosper for another 50 years and more, proving that keeping things local remained incredibly important to us all. Thank you so much.